So we have all these prices going up, and then we have that, those are that's asset inflation, that's consumer good and prices inflation. But then we have, problems where I think both of us have kind of dug into this, where we have worker shortages all across. I know I've been traveling quite a bit, as you have. And I recently spent 2 weeks in Florida going around different places. And many of the hotels I stayed at had to cut down all their services. They couldn't open at capacity. They didn't have room service. They couldn't open their restaurant just because they didn't have workers, which then causes employers to have to raise their prices, or the rates they pay, which then leads to more inflation. What's your take on this worker shortages and the government paying people not to work?
Yeah, well, if you'll allow me, I'd like to talk on another point with that as well, which is unemployment scarring. So we'll talk about unemployment scarring directly after this. So what I see with the worker shortage, all of these bailouts that some of the companies got last year that were supposed to be for, the pandemic related, economy and helping things along. A lot of these companies took that money, that bailout money, and they did share buybacks with the money. What should they have done? Research and development, staff training, helping their employees. The bedrock of any company is your employees. You've got to look after your employees. And unfortunately, what we've seen, especially in the United States, it's not as predominant in other countries, but it still exists. In the United States, a lot of because you have the lobbyists and all this, there's a lot of corruption, although we can't call it corruption, of course, but there is all this lobbying and everything else that goes on. It doesn't create this free market economy. So you have all of these huge companies, these monopolies that are just growing. And then you have all the small business owners, the SMEs, small to medium-sized enterprises, that have been crashing and going bankrupt in the economy. And this is really where we move on to unemployment scarring. So a lot of people don't understand this, but 60%, some 70%, it depends on the country, of employees are employed by the SMEs, the small to medium-sized enterprises, businesses. So when you have this huge crash in these businesses and these huge bankruptcies, what actually happens is you lose those employees. So they lose their jobs, things like that. Where does most of the spending into GDP come from? From consumer spending. I mean, this is just basics, very common sense stuff. So if these people don't have a job anymore, how can they spend into the economy and boost the GDP? See, I don't even think the GDP was genuine, what came out last year, because what they included into the GDP was all the stimulus and everything else that they created. Yeah. And then you've got to think, when that stimulus went to people's hands, they then spent that stimulus. What was that recorded in? GDP. So you've got a lot of stuff going on here, which I think is going to cause a crisis very soon, because people are just saying, I quit from their jobs. And I know a lot of people who had to work through this last year, and yet their co-workers were sat at home, not having to work. And, we make this sort of joke that they're sat there drinking a beer, watching Netflix for a year. But obviously that isn't what people were doing.
No, they were watching HBO instead, probably.
Yeah. A lot of what they've been doing is learning new skills. And here's the problem. And again, it's a problem for employers, not for, individuals like us, free thinking people. When you get a lot of time, human psychology, what it is, we start to think. When you're running around like a headless chicken, driving an hour to work or on a train or whatever, working a stressful job all day, traveling back, all you do is get home, you're exhausted. And you do that 5-6 days a week. There's no way you can think and get freedom of thought and figure out what you want to do with your life. So when you get this free time to think and relax, you start to realize what's really important to you, combined with, what happened at the start where, the health organizations or whatever are saying this could be a 5 to 6% death rate from COVID and things like that. And and look, I was one of the first people to be like, oh my goodness, this is really, really bad. 5 to 6%. That is not, that's no joke. And of course, when all the lockdowns happened, I wasn't the one saying we shouldn't be doing these lockdowns. This is a terrible idea, etc. I was agreeing with it. I'm saying, okay, that was a good decision. 5-6% death rate. We can't have this. This is just, it's a bad situation. But then when everything comes out and the true statistics come out, it's a case of, okay, you can't just look at one measurability here. You also have to look at things on the other side. You have to look at mental health and suicide rates and the business collapses, which is proven from previous recessions. If you actually look at previous recessions and the data, you see what goes up: mental health rates, problems, suicides, business collapses, unemployment. It all has a knock-on effect. So look, I'm not saying anything negative against any of your viewers that are like hardcore into all of this, and you get what I'm saying. Yeah. What I'm really saying is you've got to be objective, and you've got to look at everything and then make decisions, especially economic decisions. Things are not an island. You can't just take it as it is. And of course, that's where the media comes in, and we won't get into all of that.